Unit 3 is the cell. Before we get into all the detail of the cell and the parts that make it up, let's look a little bit at the history of the discovery of the cell. In the 1600s, a monk, Robert Hooke, was using a microscope in order to look at living organisms. What he found when he looked through the microscope were that there were these little packets that made up the organism, and they kind of reminded him of the room or the cell that he lived in the monastery. And so he used the same term, cell, in order to describe these portions of the organisms that he found. Of course, more research has gone on since the 1600s looking at the cell. And if we take a look at an animal cell, it might look something along these lines. This is a generic version. We'll see later that not all cells look the same, but in this case we're looking at the cell and all the components that we'll look at later in the course that make up cells. Cells are considered the basic unit of life because they make up the smallest level of a living organism, such as ourselves or other living things. The cellular level of the organism is where all the metabolic processes that we'll look at in this course ultimately are occurring that help to keep the organism alive or to keep the cell itself alive if we're talking about a single cell organism. The organelles that are labeled here, and we're going to take a little deeper look at over the course of this unit, are not able to survive themselves. They all have to act together in order to cause all the metabolic processes within the cell to occur and to keep the cell alive and functioning. So let's start by looking at the cell membrane, the outer portion of the cell. If we were to zoom in on the plasma membrane, this membrane that makes up the outer portion of the cell, we would see, as we see in this image here, a number of chemicals that are involved. We have carbohydrates, we have proteins, we have phospholipids. There's a number of different chemicals here, and we've looked at some of these already that divide the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell. The terms we use for that are the extracellular space, meaning the space outside of the cell, and the intracellular space, meaning the cytoplasm that we'll look at later, the liquid and the chemicals that are inside the cell. So let's start by taking a look at the chemicals that actually make up the plasma membrane itself. The phospholipid, as indicated here, is made up of a phosphate group and then lipid chains. We've actually looked at these chemicals before. The phospholipids were glycerol bound to two fatty acids with a phosphorus-containing group bound in the place of the third fatty acid that we saw in the triglycerides. This phosphorus-containing group is not just a phosphorus, but a phosphorus also bound to oxygen atoms. Because of polar covalent bonds, we actually end up with a negative charge to this phosphorus-containing group. Water molecules, as you may remember, have a negative and a positively charged side, and so the positively charged side of the water molecule is actually attracted to this phosphorus-containing group. The term for this attraction is hydrophilic. This side of the molecule is hydrophilic. Hydro refers to water, and philic refers to liking. This side of the phospholipid likes water because it has a negative charge, and the water molecule, having a positive side to it on the hydrogen side, is attracted towards that phosphorus-containing group. On the other hand, the region here with the fatty acids, fats are not attracted to water. Think back to when you're in elementary school and you took water and you poured oil into the water. The oil is a type of fat, it's not attracted towards the water, and so the two don't mix together. This portion of the plasma membrane of the phospholipid is hydrophobic. Hydro, again, referring to water, and phobic, in terms of phobia, as you might have heard before, means to be afraid. And so this portion tends to move away from the water because it's afraid of the water. So if we come back to the overall picture of the cell, what we can see is that the plasma membrane here is made up of a phospholipid, what we call bilayer. So bi meaning that there's two layers of the phospholipids. And so we can see on the top layer there's a phosphate and then lipid chains sticking into the center of the plasma membrane. And in the bottom layer, the inside layer, there's a phosphate group with the two lipid chains sticking into the center of the plasma membrane. In the end, as we mentioned before, the extracellular space has lots of water in it. The water is attracted towards the phosphate group. The cytoplasm also has water along with other chemicals in it, and it's attracted towards the phosphate group of this inside layer of the plasma membrane.